On a crowded plane, passengers laughed when a 14-year-old black boy offered to help with the emergency. Minutes later, when the pregnant woman started convulsing, everyone fell silent as they watched him do the impossible. The zipper on Jordan's worn duffel bag stuck halfway. He tugged at it, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to close it around the mess of hastily folded clothes inside. The bedroom clock read 11:42 p.m., and his flight to Los Angeles was in 7 hours. "Come on," he muttered, yanking harder. The zipper finally gave way, sliding shut with a sharp metallic sound that seemed too loud in the quiet apartment. Jordan sat back on his heels, surveying his small bedroom. The walls were bare except for a Detroit Lions poster and a framed certificate for perfect attendance. His desk held a stack of medical textbooks borrowed from his aunt's clinic, their spines cracked from constant use. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Baby, you still up?" His mother's voice carried through the thin door. "Yeah, Mom? Just finishing packing." Sarah Matthews pushed the door open, still wearing her waitress uniform from her second job. Dark circles lined her eyes, and her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "You got everything you need?" "Think so." Jordan reached for his backpack, checking its contents one last time. Wallet, ID, printed boarding pass, phone charger. His hand brushed against something at the bottom, an old family photo he'd almost forgotten about. He pulled it out, staring at the faded image of himself at age 5, sitting between his parents at a park picnic table. His father's face was turned away from the camera, as if he already knew he'd be leaving them a week later. Sarah noticed the photo and sat down on Jordan's bed. "Put that away, baby. No need to dig up old memories tonight." "I know." Jordan slipped the photo back into his backpack. "Just found it while packing." His mother's face tightened. "Jordan, there's something we need to talk about." She twisted her hands in her lap, a gesture he knew meant bad news. "I lost my morning shift at the diner." Jordan's stomach dropped. "What? Why?" "They're cutting back hours. Said they had to let some people go." She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But don't you worry about that right now. You focus on having a good time with your grandparents. Mom, if you need me to stay, no." Her voice was firm. "You're getting on that plane tomorrow. Your grandparents haven't seen you in 2 years, and they're not getting any younger." Jordan stood up and walked to his desk, picking up one of the medical textbooks. "Maybe I could pick up some hours at Aunt Marie's clinic instead of just volunteering. Help out with the bills." "You're 14, baby. Your job is to study and keep those grades up." Sarah stood, wincing as her feet protested after a 12-hour shift. "Come on, let's see what we can scrape together for dinner." In the kitchen, Jordan watched his mother heat up leftover spaghetti. The overhead light flickered, another repair they couldn't afford right now. She divided the pasta onto 2 plates, the portions noticeably smaller than usual. "Did you finish that science project?" she asked, sitting down across from him at their small table. "Yesterday. Got an A." Jordan twirled spaghetti around his fork. "Mr. Thompson said it was college-level work." Sarah beamed. "That's my boy. You keep this up, and medical school won't know what hit it." After dinner, Jordan helped his mother count bills at the kitchen table. The stack of envelopes grew into 2 piles, urgent and can wait. The urgent pile was significantly larger. "Grandma and Grandpa called earlier," Sarah said, writing numbers in her checkbook. "They're excited to pick you up at LAX." Jordan nodded, adding up figures in his head. The math was clear. They were $300 short on rent this month. "Mom, are you sure about this trip?" The ticket was expensive, and Jordan Matthews stopped right there. She set down her pen. "Some things are worth more than money. Your grandparents need to see you, and you need a break from—" She gestured at the bills scattered across the table. "All this." Later that night, Jordan lay in bed, staring at his ceiling. The streetlight outside cast shadows through his window, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. He thought about his mother working another double shift tomorrow, about the unpaid bills, about leaving her alone to deal with everything. Rolling over, he grabbed one of his aunt's medical books from the nightstand. If he couldn't sleep, he might as well study. The chapter on emergency medical procedures was well worn, the margins filled with his neat handwriting. His aunt had taught him the basics of first aid during his weekend volunteer shifts, and he soaked up the knowledge like a sponge. The sound of his mother crying quietly in her room drifted through the wall. Jordan gripped the textbook tighter, his throat tight. He'd become a doctor someday. He'd make enough money, so his mother never had to work 2 jobs again. He just had to stay focused, keep his grades up, ignore the whispers at school about the scholarship kid who thought he could make it in medicine. The clock ticked past 2 a.m., then 3 a.m. Jordan's eyes burned, but sleep wouldn't come. In 4 hours, he'd board his first flight alone. In 4 hours, he'd leave his mother to face their mounting problems by herself. In 4 hours, everything could change. He didn't know how right he was. The Detroit Metropolitan Airport buzzed with early morning activity. Jordan stood at the security checkpoint, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder, trying to swallow the lump in his throat. His mother squeezed his hand tight enough to hurt. "You've got everything?" Sarah asked for the third time. "Boarding pass? ID?" "Yes, Mom." Jordan patted his pocket. "All here? And you'll call as soon as you land?" "Promise." The PA system crackled overhead. "Final boarding call for Flight 2476 to Los Angeles." Sarah's eyes welled up. "That's you, baby." She pulled him into a fierce hug, and Jordan caught a whiff of coffee and diner grease from her uniform. She'd come straight from her night shift to drive him to the airport. "Mom, I can still stay dash, don't you dare." She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Go on now. Make me proud." Jordan joined the security line, turning back every few steps to wave. His mother stood there, small and tired in her waitress uniform, until he couldn't see her anymore. The security process confused him. Take off shoes? Belt too? The businessman behind him sighed impatiently as Jordan fumbled with his belongings. Finally through, he rushed to his gate, arriving just as boarding began. "Zone 4? The gate agent checked his boarding pass. "That'll be in a few minutes, hon." Jordan sat in a nearby chair, watching other passengers line up. A heavily pregnant woman struggled with her carry-on bag, her face pinched with discomfort. No one moved to help her. "Here, let me get that." Jordan stood up, reaching for her bag. The woman hesitated, looking him over. Jordan was used to that look, the quick assessment of his worn jeans, his skin color, his youth. But she smiled. "Thank you. I'm not supposed to lift anything heavy." "How far along are you?" he asked, helping her with the bag. 8 months. She rubbed her swollen belly. "Cutting it close for flying. But my sister's wedding." "Now boarding zone 4. The gate agent called. Jordan's hands were sweaty as he walked down the jet bridge. He'd never been on a plane before. The cabin seemed smaller than he'd imagined, cramped and narrow. He found his seat, middle of course, and stowed his backpack underneath. The pregnant woman from the gate struggled past, heading for the back. 2 flight attendants huddled near the galley, whispering. 3 people called in sick, one said. "We're already understaffed." "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 2476 to Los Angeles." The captain's voice crackled through the speakers. "Flight time today will be approximately 4 hours and 30 minutes. Jordan pulled out his aunt's medical journal, flipping to where he'd left off last night. The article discussed emergency procedures in resource-limited settings. He'd been reading these during his weekend volunteer shifts at the clinic, fascinated by how doctors adapted to challenging conditions. A teenage girl plopped down in the window seat next to him, immediately putting in earbuds. On his other side, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit took the aisle seat, spreading out like he owned it. The plane took off with a roar that made Jordan's stomach drop. He gripped the armrests, breathing hard. The businessman glanced at him with a mix of amusement and annoyance. "First flight?" the man asked. Jordan nodded, not trusting his voice. Nothing to it, though with the way airlines cut corners these days. He shook his head, returning to his laptop. An hour into the flight, turbulence hit. The plane bounced and shuddered. Jordan's medical journal slipped from his hands, sliding under the seat in front. As he bent to retrieve it, he heard a gasp from the back of the plane. The pregnant woman from earlier was gripping her armrest, face contorted in pain. A flight attendant hurried past. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Just cramping. "It'll pass." Jordan watched over the back of his seat as the flight attendant helped the woman breathe through what was clearly more than simple cramping. His aunt's voice echoed in his head, listing signs of early labor. The dinner service started. Jordan accepted a small bag of pretzels, but his appetite had vanished. Something felt wrong. The pregnant woman's discomfort was becoming more visible, her breathing more labored. "Excuse me," she called out suddenly, her voice tight with panic. I think something's wrong." The flight attendant returned, bending close to speak with her. Other passengers turned in their seats to watch. Jordan noticed the woman's hands trembling as she gripped her belly. "Is there a doctor on board?" The flight attendant's voice carried through the cabin. "We have a medical situation. If there's any medical professional present, please press your call button." No buttons lit up. The businessman beside Jordan snorted. "Great. This is all we need." Another cry of pain from the back. The pregnant woman was crying now, fear clear on her face. "It's too early," she kept saying. "It's too early." Jordan thought about his aunt's clinic, about the emergency procedures he'd studied. He knew the basics of childbirth, in theory, at least. He'd assisted with prenatal checkups, learned about complications, studied the warning signs. The flight attendant made another announcement, more urgent this time. Still no response. Jordan's hand hovered over his call button. The businessman noticed and laughed. "What, you think you can help, kid?" But Jordan wasn't listening. The pregnant woman's face had gone pale, her breathing shallow and quick. He recognized the signs of distress from his training. Before he could second-guess himself, he pressed the button. The flight attendant appeared, looking harried. "Yes, Jordan swallowed hard. "I might be able to help. I volunteer at a medical clinic. I know some things about childbirth and emergencies." The businessman barked out a laugh. Several nearby passengers turned to stare. "He's just a kid," someone muttered. "Can't be more than 15. The flight attendant looked uncertain. "I'm sorry, honey, but we need someone with real medical training." Another cry of pain cut through the cabin, this one louder than before. The pregnant woman was clutching her stomach, tears streaming down her face. "Please," Jordan said, standing up. "At least let me try. I know what to look for. I know what to do if things go wrong." The flight attendant hesitated, glancing toward the back of the plane. No other help was coming. "My blood pressure," the pregnant woman gasped out. It's not good. High risk." Jordan's training kicked in. High-risk pregnancy, possible preeclampsia, premature labor at high altitude. His mind raced through everything he'd learned. The businessman stood up too. "This is ridiculous. You can't seriously be considering letting this boy dash." "I know what I'm doing," Jordan interrupted, his voice stronger than he felt. "And right now, I'm all you've got." The pregnant woman's scream pierced through the cabin noise. Jordan pushed past the businessman, ignoring the murmurs from other passengers as he made his way to the back of the plane. The flight attendant followed close behind. "Ma'am, I'm Jordan. I help out at a medical clinic." He knelt beside her seat, keeping his voice steady like his aunt had taught him. "Can you tell me your name?" "Maria," she gasped. Sweat beaded on her forehead. "Maria Gonzalez." "Okay, Maria. How far apart are the contractions?" She gripped the armrest. "Maybe 5 minutes?" "It's too soon. I'm only 32 weeks. Jordan's mind raced through what he knew about premature labor. 32 weeks meant high risk but viable. He turned to the flight attendant. "Do you have a medical kit?" "Yes." "Under the galley." She hurried to retrieve it. A man in a Navy business suit, different from the one who'd laughed at Jordan, stepped forward. "This is absurd. He's just a child. We can't trust him with this situation." "Sir," Jordan said, not looking up as he checked Maria's pulse, "unless you have medical training, please step back and give us space." The man's face reddened. "Now listen here, Dash. I want him to help." Maria cut in, her voice tight with pain. "Please. Something's wrong. I can feel it." The flight attendant returned with the medical kit. Jordan opened it quickly, scanning the contents. Blood pressure cuff, stethoscope, basic medications. Not much for delivering a baby, but it would have to do. "Maria, are you taking any medications?" Jordan wrapped the blood pressure cuff around her arm. "Yes, for high blood pressure. But I forgot to take it this morning. Was rushing to the airport." Jordan's stomach tightened. Missed medication, high-risk pregnancy, premature labor. The situation was worse than he'd thought. He pumped up the blood pressure cuff, listening carefully. The reading made him curse under his breath. 160/95. That's way too high. What does that mean? Maria's sister asked from the next seat, gripping her hand. "It means we need to get it down." Jordan turned to the flight attendant. How long until we land? 3 hours to Los Angeles. We could divert to Denver in about 40 minutes. Another contraction hit. Maria cried out, doubling over. Jordan timed it on his watch. 4 minutes since the last one. Too fast. The man in the Navy suit spoke up again. This is ridiculous. I'm a business executive with medical companies. I know enough to see this boy isn't over his head. Passengers were gathering in the aisle now, craning their necks to watch. Jordan heard their whispers. Should we trust him? He's just a kid. Where are his parents? Probably not even in high school. Jordan's hands trembled slightly as he dug through the medical kit. Focus on the patient, he told himself. Like Anne-Marie taught you. Block everything else out. Maria, I need to check how far along you are. He kept his voice professional, though his heart hammered in his chest. Is that okay? She nodded, gripping her sister's hand tighter. The executive stepped closer. This is completely inappropriate. A minor performing medical procedures? The liability alone, sir. The flight attendant interrupted. Please return to your seat. Not until someone qualified takes over. Jordan looked up at him. Then find someone qualified. Otherwise, let me work. He turned back to Maria, who was breathing in short, sharp gasps. Her skin felt clammy. Jordan recognized the signs of preeclampsia from his aunt's teaching. Without medication, this could turn dangerous fast. The baby's coming, Maria moaned. Oh God, it's coming now. Jordan checked. His aunt's training hadn't covered much about actual delivery, but he knew enough to recognize she was right. The baby wasn't waiting for Denver. We need to make space, he announced. Clear the last 2 rows. And I need clean towels, bottled water, and any medical supplies you have. The flight attendants moved quickly, relocating passengers. Not everyone went quietly. This is insane, the executive declared. The airline can't seriously allow this. What choice do we have? Another passenger shot back. Jordan blocked out their arguing. Maria's blood pressure was still climbing. Her next contraction came just 3 minutes after the last. The baby was coming fast, too fast, and they were 7 miles above the ground with no other help in sight. Jordan, Maria grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with fear. I can't feel the baby moving. Cold fear shot through him. No fetal movement could mean dozens of life-threatening complications. He needed to make a decision. Now! The executive was still hovering, still protesting. Other passengers watched with a mix of concern and skepticism. The flight attendants looked to Jordan uncertainly, waiting for direction. He thought of his mother back in Detroit, probably still worrying about him. Thought of his aunt's voice walking him through emergency procedures. Thought of all the times people had doubted him, dismissed him, assumed he couldn't handle responsibility. Maria screamed as another contraction hit. Jordan straightened up, squaring his shoulders. Everyone who isn't helping needs to move to the front of the plane. Now! The executive opened his mouth to argue again. Now! Jordan repeated, his voice leaving no room for debate. This baby is coming whether you like it or not. And right now, I'm all we've got. To his surprise, people started moving. The executive stayed a moment longer, then stepped back, shaking his head. Okay, Maria. Jordan snapped on medical gloves from the kit. Let's deliver your baby. The plane hit another patch of turbulence. The seatbelt sign dinged on. Somewhere up front, the baby started crying. Jordan took a deep breath. Everything he'd learned, everything he'd studied, everything he'd trained for, it all came down to this moment. 7 miles up, with no doctor, no proper equipment, and a plane full of doubters watching his every move, a 14-year-old boy from Detroit prepared to deliver a baby. The real crisis was just beginning. I need everyone to stay calm, Jordan announced, his voice carrying through the cabin. Maria, we're going to get through this together. He turned to the flight attendants. I need blankets, all the clean towels you have, and hot water if possible. The younger flight attendant nodded. I'll get them. This is absolutely unprecedented, the executive in the Navy suit declared from his new position a few rows ahead. The airline will be hearing about this. Jordan ignored him, focusing on Maria. Her face had gone ghostly pale, and her breathing was becoming more labored. He checked her blood pressure again, 168/98. Still climbing. Listen up, he called to the cabin crew. We need to set up a sterile area as best we can. Clear these last 2 rows completely. The flight attendants moved efficiently, redistributing passengers and gathering supplies. Jordan caught fragments of whispered conversations. Can't believe they're letting him. Where are his parents? Should have been a doctor on board. Maria grabbed his arm. Jordan, she gasped, something feels wrong. Different from normal contractions. He recalled his aunt's warnings about preeclampsia complications. Tell me exactly what you're feeling. Pressure. So much pressure. In my head, everything's spinning. The senior flight attendant returned with an armful of supplies. This is everything we have. The captain wants an update. Jordan quickly organized the supplies. Towels, blankets, the meager contents of the medical kit. Not nearly enough for a high-risk delivery, but it would have to do. Tell the captain we have a preeclamptic mother in active labor, he said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. Contractions 3 minutes apart. We need emergency medical services standing by in Denver. The executive scoffed. Listen to him, using medical terms like he actually dash. Either help or be quiet. Jordan snapped, his patience finally breaking. Maria's life is at risk, and so is her baby's. I don't have time for your doubts. A murmur ran through the watching passengers. The executive's face turned purple, but he fell silent. Jordan turned back to Maria. We need to move you to this cleared space. It'll give us more room to work. She nodded, trying to stand. Her sister and a flight attendant helped her move to the makeshift delivery area. Jordan had them arrange blankets to create as clean a surface as possible. Jordan, Maria whispered as they helped her lie down. I'm scared. I know, but I'm not leaving you. He checked her pulse again. Too fast. Remember the breathing we practiced? In through your nose, out through your mouth. The plane hit another patch of turbulence. Medical supplies slid across the floor. Jordan caught the blood pressure cuff before it could roll away. We need extra hands, he announced. Any nurses, EMTs, anyone with medical training, even basic first aid? I need you now. Silence. Then a young woman stood up. I'm a nursing student. 2nd year. Perfect. Come help. An older man raised his hand. Former military medic. Been a while, but thank you. We need you too. The executive's voice cut through again. This is absurd. A child leading a medical team? Several passengers turned to glare at him. You got a better idea? Someone called out. Maria's next contraction hit hard. She screamed, gripping her sister's hand. Jordan checked her progress while the nursing student monitored her pulse. She's fully dilated, he announced. Baby's coming now. The former medic helped position Maria while Jordan gave quick instructions to his makeshift team. The nursing student looked nervous but determined. The flight attendants stood ready with supplies. Blood pressure spiking, the nursing student reported. 180/100. Jordan's stomach clenched. Way too high. Without medication to bring it down, Maria risked seizures or worse. Maria, look at me, he said firmly. Focus on my voice. You're doing great. The executive stood up again. This is too much responsibility for sir. The senior flight attendant cut him off. Return to your seat immediately, or we'll have air marshals restrain you. Jordan blocked out the arguing, focused entirely on Maria. Her eyes had started to look unfocused. Bad sign. Baby's crowning, he announced. Maria, when the next contraction hits, I need you to push. The plane lurched again. Someone up front cursed. The nursing student nearly lost her balance. Can't we stop this turbulence? Someone shouted. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're doing our best to find smooth air. Please remain in your seats with seatbelts fastened. Maria screamed as another contraction ripped through her. Jordan saw the baby's head begin to emerge. Good, that's good, he encouraged. Another big push. The executive had stood up yet again. This is completely irresponsible. I'm documenting everything for the lawsuit dash. Shut up. Multiple voices shouted in unison. Jordan kept his focus on Maria. Her face was dangerously pale now, her breathing shallow. The numbers from his last blood pressure check burned in his mind. Without intervention, she could stroke out or seize at any moment. Something's wrong, Maria whimpered. I can't. Everything's getting dark. Jordan made a split-second decision. I need the emergency medical kit from the cockpit. Now! A flight attendant ran to retrieve it. Jordan knew it would have medications he wasn't technically qualified to administer. But if Maria's blood pressure didn't come down soon, the executive pushed forward. I absolutely forbid this. You cannot allow a minor to administer Dash. My sister is dying. Maria's sister screamed at him. Let him work. The baby's head was fully visible now. Jordan could see the umbilical cord. His heart stopped. The cord was wrapped around the baby's neck. In that moment, everything his aunt had taught him, everything he'd studied, everything he'd trained for, it all came down to the next few seconds. 7 miles up, with a mother's life failing and a baby struggling to be born, Jordan Matthews had to make the hardest decision of his young life. And there was no time to doubt. Give me surgical scissors from the medical kit. Now! Jordan's voice cut through the cabin noise. His hands remained steady despite the fear coursing through him. The umbilical cord wrapped around the baby's neck was a deadly complication he'd only read about. The nursing student's face went pale when she saw the problem. Oh, God! Don't react, Jordan whispered to her. We can't panic, Maria. The flight attendant returned with the cockpit's emergency kit. Jordan quickly found what he needed: surgical scissors, sterile gauze, and, most crucially, emergency medication for blood pressure. Maria's eyes fluttered. I can't feel my legs. The executive pushed forward again. This has gone far enough. I'm taking over Dash, sir. Jordan's voice cracked like a whip. Either scrub up and help, or get out of my way. This baby is coming now. The nursing student checked Maria's vitals again. BP's still rising. 185 over 105. Jordan made his decision. He pulled the blood pressure medication from the kit. You can't administer that. The executive lunged forward. It's illegal, Dash. The former military medic blocked his path. Back off. Now. Maria, Jordan said calmly, preparing the medication. I'm giving you something to bring your blood pressure down. It's going to help. Her sister gripped Jordan's arm. Do whatever you have to. Save them. Jordan administered the medication with practiced precision, just as he'd seen his aunt do countless times. The executive was still shouting about lawsuits and regulations, but his voice seemed distant now. Focus on what's in front of you. Jordan heard his aunt's voice in his head. One problem at a time. Next contraction, Maria. I need the strongest push you can give me. She nodded weakly, her face covered in sweat. The medication hadn't had time to work yet. Her blood pressure was still dangerously high. The contraction hit. Maria pushed, screaming. The baby moved slightly, but the cord tightened. Stop pushing, Jordan ordered. His mind raced through everything he'd read about nuchal cords. He had seconds to make this work. The plane hit another patch of turbulence. Medical supplies rattled. Someone up front vomited. I need more light, Jordan called out. Flight attendants rushed forward with flashlights. Maria's sister started crying. Please, God, please. Jordan blocked it all out. With careful movements, he began to loop the cord, trying to create slack. The baby's face was starting to turn dusky. BP's dropping, the nursing student reported. 160 over 95. The medication was working. But now they had a new problem. The baby's heart rate was slowing. A memory flashed through Jordan's mind. His father walking out the door, never looking back. The feeling of not being enough, of being abandoned. He pushed the thought away. Focus. Maria, when I say push, give me everything you've got. The executive had gone quiet, watching with the rest of the passengers as Jordan worked. The entire plane seemed to hold its breath. Jordan managed to loosen the cord slightly. Now, Maria, push. She bore down with what strength she had left. The baby moved. Again, another push. The shoulders emerged. Jordan's hands moved with a certainty that surprised even him, guiding the baby while working to keep the cord from tightening again. One more big push. Maria screamed. The baby slid free, but it wasn't crying. The cabin went deadly silent. Jordan could hear his own heart pounding as he quickly cleaned the baby's airways and began gentle chest compressions with 2 fingers. Come on, he whispered. Come on, little one. The executive stepped forward, his face ashen. Is it? Quiet. Jordan never took his eyes off the baby. Come on. Breathe. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. The baby gave a wet cough, then let out a piercing wail. The cabin erupted in cheers and applause. Maria's sister burst into tears. The nursing student slumped in relief. But Jordan wasn't celebrating yet. Maria? Maria? Can you hear me? Her eyes were unfocused, her skin clammy. The pregnancy complications weren't over. Baby's good, Jordan reported, handing the newborn to the nursing student. But we need to stabilize Mom. Her pressure's still too high. He checked her vitals again, noting signs of possible hemorrhage. They still had 30 minutes until Denver. The executive stepped closer, his earlier arrogance gone. What can I do to help? Jordan looked up at him, surprised. Hold her hand. Talk to her. Keep her conscious. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of medical procedures. Jordan worked methodically, doing everything he could with their limited supplies to keep Maria stable. The baby girl was perfect, small but breathing well. 6 pounds, 4 ounces according to the makeshift scale they'd rigged up. Jordan, Maria whispered, her voice weak but clear. Thank you. He squeezed her hand. Just hang on. We're almost there. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Denver. Emergency medical services are standing by. Jordan sat back on his heels, exhausted. His hands were shaking now that the immediate crisis had passed. A flight attendant touched his shoulder. You did it, honey. You actually did it. But Jordan knew they weren't out of danger yet. Maria's blood pressure was still concerning, and they had no way to properly monitor the baby's oxygen levels at this altitude. The executive cleared his throat. I was wrong about you, son. Jordan didn't respond. His mind was already running through what he'd tell the EMTs when they landed, what complications they needed to watch for, what medications Maria would need. 7 miles up, a 14-year-old boy from Detroit had just delivered a baby and saved 2 lives. And they still had to stick the landing. Descent starting in 5 minutes, the captain announced. All passengers must return to their seats. Jordan shook his head. I'm not leaving them. The senior flight attendant touched his shoulder. FAA regulations dash. Then write me up. He checked Maria's blood pressure again. 155/90. Better, but still not good enough. I need to monitor them until we land. The baby started crying. A strong, healthy sound that made several passengers tear up. The nursing student was running through basic newborn checks, calling out numbers that Jordan committed to memory for the EMTs. Temperature 98.2, respiration 40 breaths per minute. Maria's eyes fluttered. Is she okay? My baby. She's perfect, Jordan assured her, though his concern grew as he noticed Maria's increasing pallor. Possible postpartum hemorrhage. They needed to land. Fast. The plane began its descent. Pressure changes made the baby cry louder. Jordan's ears popped painfully. 5 minutes to landing, the captain updated. Emergency crews standing by. The executive, still hovering nearby, had transformed from critic to assistant. What supplies will they need first? Tell them possible severe preeclampsia and postpartum hemorrhage, Jordan replied, his voice clipped and professional. Blood pressure's been as high as 185/105. I administered hydralazine from the emergency kit at 1542. The man blinked, clearly surprised by Jordan's command of medical terminology. The plane banked sharply. Medical supplies slid across the floor. The baby wailed louder. BP dropping, the nursing student called out. 140/85. Jordan's relief was short-lived. Maria's skin felt colder, her pulse thready. Classic signs of shock. Need more blankets, he ordered. And raise her feet slightly. The military medic moved to help. Looks like hemorrhage. Yeah. Jordan's mind raced through treatment options. They had no 4 fluids, no way to replace what she was losing. Come on, Maria. Stay with me. Her sister gripped Jordan's arm. She's getting worse, isn't she? Before he could answer, Maria's eyes rolled back. Her body went rigid. Seizure. Jordan shouted. Help me turn her on her side. The nursing student and medic rushed to assist. Passengers gasped as Maria's body convulsed. 2 minutes to landing, the captain announced. Jordan supported Maria's head, counting seconds. The seizure lasted 45 seconds, an eternity at 30,000 feet. The baby's cries grew more insistent. The nursing student tried to comfort her while keeping her vital signs stable. "Jordan," she called out, baby's temperature dropping. 97.8 now. He nodded, mind working furiously. Premature, baby, temperature instability, mother in critical condition. They needed ground medical support now. The plane's wheels touched down hard. Medical supplies bounced. Someone screamed. Jordan braced himself over Maria, protecting her from the impact. The executive grabbed the baby's makeshift bassinet, steadying it. They taxied rapidly to the gate. Jordan could see emergency vehicles through the windows, lights flashing. BP crashing, the nursing student reported. 120/70 and falling. Maria's eyes opened slightly. "Jordan?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Right here. We've landed. Help's coming." The cabin door opened. Paramedics rushed in, equipment ready. Jordan delivered his report in one breath. Maria Gonzalez, 32 weeks pregnant. Emergency delivery at altitude. Severe preeclampsia, postpartum hemorrhage, grand mal seizure 45 seconds duration. Baby girl, approximately 6 pounds 4 ounces, stable but slight temperature drop. The lead paramedic stared at him, then at the successful delivery scene. "You delivered this baby?" "Yes." "Can we focus on the patient now?" That snapped them into action. The paramedics moved efficiently, transferring Maria to a gurney while neonatal specialists checked the baby. "Good work, kid," the lead paramedic said as they prepared to move Maria. "You probably saved their lives." Jordan followed them to the cabin door. The executive stepped forward. "Son, I need to apologize, not now." Jordan didn't take his eyes off Maria. "She needs type and cross for possible transfusion. Baby needs NICU monitoring for prematurity and altitude exposure." The paramedics wheeled Maria out. Jordan watched them go, his hands finally starting to shake as the adrenaline wore off. The nursing student touched his arm. "That was incredible." Jordan didn't respond. He was mentally reviewing everything he'd done, every decision he'd made. Had he forgotten anything? Should he have done something differently? "Young man," a flight attendant called. "The hospital wants to speak with you. About the medications you administered." Jordan nodded, exhausted but still focused. He hadn't had time to worry about rules and regulations during the emergency. Now he'd have to explain every decision. The executive stepped forward again. "I'll handle the hospital administration. And the airline. You focus on completing your report for the medical team." "Why?" Jordan asked, finally looking at him. "Because I was wrong. Completely wrong. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." Passengers started applauding as Jordan made his way off the plane. He barely noticed. His mind was still with Maria and the baby, still running through vital signs and complications to watch for. 7 miles up, he'd been the only help available. Now, standing in the Denver airport terminal, a 14-year-old boy from Detroit prepared to defend his actions to a hospital full of medical professionals. The real test was just beginning. The emergency room buzzed with controlled chaos. Jordan sat in a hard plastic chair, still wearing his clothes from the flight, now stained with evidence of the delivery. A police officer stood nearby, taking notes about the incident. "So you administer prescription medication without a license?" The officer's pen hovered over his notepad. "To save her life, yes." Jordan's voice was hoarse from exhaustion. Her blood pressure was 185/105. She was about to stroke out. The executive, who'd introduced himself as Thomas Richardson, interrupted from across the room. "That decision saved both mother and child. I witnessed the entire thing. Still need to document it," the officer said, but his tone had softened. A doctor in scrubs hurried into the waiting area. "Jordan Matthews?" Jordan stood up, so quickly he got dizzy. "How are they?" "Both stable. Mrs. Gonzalez is receiving transfusions, but her pressure's normalizing. The baby's in NICU, but her stats are remarkably good considering the circumstances." Relief made Jordan's knees weak. He sat back down hard. "The emergency responders showed me your report," the doctor continued. "Incredibly thorough. Where did you learn medical terminology?" "My aunt runs a community clinic in Detroit. I volunteer their weekends." The doctor nodded thoughtfully. "Well, you made all the right calls today, including the hydralazine. Without that, we'd be having a very different conversation. The police officer closed his notebook. Sounds like justified emergency intervention to me. Jordan barely heard them. Can I see them? Mrs. Gonzalez is asking for you. The doctor gestured for him to follow. They walked through sterile hallways to the maternity ward. Jordan's shoes squeaked on the polished floors. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably his mother wondering why he hadn't landed in Los Angeles yet. Maria lay in a hospital bed, looking pale but alert. Her sister sat beside her, holding her hand, and in a clear bassinet next to the bed. Jort? Maria's voice was weak but clear. Meet your namesake. He stopped short. What? Jordan Maria Gonzalez. She smiled tiredly. If that's okay with you. He stared at the tiny baby wrapped in hospital blankets. She was pink and perfect, showing no signs of the dramatic circumstances of her birth. I don't know what to say. You saved our lives. Maria's sister wiped tears from her eyes. Both of them. A nurse came in to check Maria's vitals. BP 130/80. Much better. Jordan automatically logged the numbers in his head, then realized he didn't need to anymore. The crisis was over. His legs started shaking. He sat down quickly in a nearby chair. Adrenaline crash, the doctor explained kindly. Totally normal after what you've been through. The baby, little Jordan, started fussing. The nurse lifted her expertly, checking her temperature. 98.6, she reported. She's regulating beautifully. Thomas Richardson appeared in the doorway, his earlier arrogance completely gone. The airline's on the line. They'd like to speak with you, son. Jordan shook his head. I need to call my mom first. She doesn't even know. His voice cracked. Suddenly, all he could think about was his mother, probably worried sick, waiting for a call that should have come hours ago. Maria seemed to read his mind. Go. Call her. We'll be here. Jordan stepped into the hallway on shaky legs. His phone showed 15 missed calls from his mother. He dialed her number. Jordan? Her voice was frantic. Baby, where are you? The airline said your flight was diverted, Mom. He had to stop, swallowing hard. Mom, I'm okay. I'm in Denver. Something happened on the flight. Are you hurt? No, I'm fine. There was a pregnant woman. She needed help. He tried to explain, but the words jumbled together. How could he tell her what had happened? That her 14-year-old son had delivered a baby at 30,000 feet? That he'd made life-or-death decisions while people tried to stop him? Jordan Matthews? A hospital administrator approached, holding a clipboard. We need to discuss the incident report. Mom, I have to go. I'll call you back, Don't you dare hang up this phone. Jordan Anthony Matthews. Tell me exactly what's going on. The administrator waited impatiently. Thomas Richardson stepped in. Ma'am, this is Thomas Richardson. I was on the flight with your son, and I need to tell you what a remarkable young man you've raised. Jordan sank into a chair as Richardson explained everything. The emergency, Jordan's competence, the successful delivery, the lives saved. My baby did that. His mother's voice shook. My Jordan? Mom? He couldn't say more. A commotion down the hall caught his attention. News cameras. Reporters. Oh, God. He wasn't ready for this. Thomas Richardson took charge again. Young man, you need to rest. I'll handle the media, but no buts. You've done enough heroic things for one day. Jordan's mother was still on the phone. Baby? You really delivered a baby on that plane? Yeah, Mom? They named her Jordan. She started crying. Jordan could picture her in their small kitchen, probably still in her waitress uniform, gripping the phone. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. So proud. The baby's cry echoed from Maria's room. Jordan turned automatically toward the sound. Mom, I gotta go check Go. But call me back. Promise. He hung up and hurried back to Maria's room. The nurse was showing her how to breastfeed. Everything okay? He asked, Dr. Mode still engaged. Maria smiled. Perfect. Thanks to you. Baby Jordan latched successfully. The nurse made an approving sound. Strong suck reflex. Good sign. Jordan watched the tiny girl, still hardly believing what had happened. Just this morning, he'd been worried about leaving his mother alone in Detroit. Now, Jordan? Maria's voice was soft. Thank you for believing in yourself when no one else did. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Outside the room, he could hear Thomas Richardson talking to reporters. Words like heroic and extraordinary drifted in. But Jordan wasn't listening. He was watching the rise and fall of the baby's chest, automatically counting respirations. Still the careful volunteer medic, even now, 7 miles up, he'd found something he didn't know he had. And nothing would ever be the same. The Denver airport terminal was chaos. News crews crowded the gates, their cameras trained on the arrival area. Jordan sat in a quiet corner of the airport medical center, still wearing his stained clothes from the flight. The medical team is boarding now, a gate agent informed him. Once they clear the plane, we can get you to Los Angeles. Jordan nodded tiredly. He'd been awake for nearly 24 hours now. The last thing he wanted was more attention, more questions, more cameras. Thomas Richardson appeared with 2 cups of coffee. Here, you look like you need this. Thanks. Jordan took the cup, his hands still slightly shaky. Any word from the hospital? Maria's numbers are stable. Baby's doing great. Thomas sat down beside him. You know, I've been thinking. My company funds several medical scholarship programs. Jordan's phone buzzed again. His grandparents this time. Jordan? Baby, are you okay? His grandmother's voice trembled. We saw the news dash. I'm fine, Grandma. Just delayed. Delayed? Boy, you delivered a baby on an airplane. That's not delayed. That's a miracle. A doctor in a white coat approached, holding a clipboard. Mr. Matthews? I'm Dr. Sarah Chun, Chief of Emergency Medicine. Could we speak privately? Jordan's stomach tightened. Was this about the medication he'd administered? Go on, his grandmother said. Call us back. Dr. Chin led him to a quiet consultation room. I've reviewed the incident reports and spoken with the hospital team. She paused, studying him. Your actions were extraordinary. I just did what I had to do. No. She shook her head. You did what many trained professionals might have hesitated to do. You made split-second decisions that saved 2 lives. A knock at the door interrupted them. A tall man in an expensive suit entered. Jordan Matthews? I'm Marcus Evans, hospital administrator. We'd like to discuss your future. Jordan straightened in his chair. My future? We have a partnership program with local high schools. Pre-medical training, mentorship, guaranteed interview for our scholarship program. More people filed in: doctors, administrators, executives. Jordan's head spun. Thomas Richardson spoke up from the doorway. Don't overwhelm him. He's been up all night saving lives. Dr. Chin smiled. He's right. But Jordan, we'd like you to consider our offer. Full academic support through high school, mentorship from our medical team, and a clear path to medical school. Jordan thought about his mother counting bills at their kitchen table. About the unpaid rent. My mom, he started, would be offered a position in our administrative team. Marcus Evans cut in. Full benefits, of course. The room started to blur. Jordan gripped his coffee cup tighter. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, he could see his grandparents hurrying through the terminal. They must have caught the first flight from L.A. Jordan, his grandmother burst into the room, pulling him into a fierce hug. Oh, baby! His grandfather stood in the doorway, tears in his eyes. We saw everything on the news. Our boy. The hospital staff tactfully stepped out, giving them privacy. Only Thomas Richardson remained. Your grandson is a remarkable young man, he said, and I owe him an apology. I was wrong about him. Very wrong. Jordan's grandmother released him, wiping her eyes. Of course you were wrong. My Jordan's been helping people since he could walk. A nurse appeared with an update from the hospital. Maria's asking for you. She'd like you to see the baby again before you leave. Jordan stood automatically. His grandmother caught his arm. Baby, you need to rest. I need to check their vitals first. The words came automatically. Then he caught himself. His grandfather laughed. Already talking like a doctor? The terminal had grown more crowded. Passengers from the flight were giving interviews, describing what they'd seen. Just took charge like he'd been doing it for years. Saved both their lives. Most amazing thing I've ever seen. Jordan tried to slip past unnoticed, but a reporter spotted him. Jordan, can we get a statement? How did you know what to do? What made you step up when others wouldn't? Thomas Richardson stepped between Jordan and the cameras. The young man needs rest. He's been up all night saving lives while you've been chasing stories. In the hospital wing, Maria was sitting up in bed, looking stronger. Baby Jordan slept peacefully in her arms. There's my hero. Maria smiled. Come see how big she's getting already. Jordan checked the monitors automatically. Blood pressure normal, heart rate steady. The baby's color was perfect. You can't help it, can you? Maria laughed softly. Always the doctor. Sorry. Don't be. It's who you are. Her sister came in with papers from the birth certificate office. It's official. Jordan Maria Gonzalez. He stared at the certificate, at his name permanently linked to this tiny life he'd helped bring into the world. Jordan? Thomas Richardson appeared in the doorway. Your flight to Los Angeles is boarding. With medical clearance this time, he nodded, suddenly reluctant to leave. You'll call if anything changes? Any complications? Go, Maria said firmly. We're in good hands. Thanks to you. The walk back through the terminal felt surreal. Passengers smiled and pointed. Camera flashes went off. Jordan barely noticed. His grandparents waited at the gate with Thomas Richardson and the hospital administrators. We'll have contracts drawn up by the time you return to Detroit, Marcus Evans said. For both you and your mother. Jordan thought about his mother again, probably still in her waitress uniform, waiting for news. Can I call her first? Before we board? Everyone stepped back, giving him privacy. Jordan dialed home. Baby? His mother answered on the first ring. Are you okay? Mom? He had to stop, gathering himself. Mom, everything's going to be different now. I know, baby. I know. No, I mean, he told her about the hospital's offer, the job, the scholarship track. She started crying. My baby, my brave, brilliant boy. The final boarding call came over the speakers. I have to go, Mom, but when I get back, go. Fly safe. She paused. And Jordan? I always knew you were meant for great things. 7 miles up, a 14-year-old boy from Detroit had found his calling. Now it was time to soar. 3 weeks after the flight to Denver, Jordan stood in the Detroit Metropolitan Airport again. This time, he wasn't a nervous 14-year-old catching his first flight. He was the guest of honor. Ladies and gentlemen, the hospital administrator announced to the gathered crowd, please welcome Jordan Matthews and his mother, Sarah Matthews. Camera flashes erupted. Jordan squinted under the bright lights, still uncomfortable with the attention. His mother squeezed his hand, radiant in her new business suit, a far cry from her waitress uniform. Just breathe, she whispered. Like you taught Maria. Maria herself stood in the crowd. Baby Jordan cradled in her arms. She'd flown in specially for this event, her first flight since the delivery. The baby wore a onesie with "My Hero" printed across the front. Thomas Richardson stepped up to the podium. 3 weeks ago, in this very airport, a young man boarded a flight that would change many lives, including my own. Jordan shifted uncomfortably. His Aunt Marie patted his shoulder. What happened next has been well documented, Thomas continued. A medical emergency at 30,000 feet. A mother and baby in crisis. And a 14-year-old boy who stepped up when others, myself included, tried to stop him. The crowd murmured. Several people wiped their eyes. Today, we're here to announce 2 things. Thomas gestured to a group of executives. First, Matthews Medical Scholarship Program. Fully funded, designed to help inner-city youth pursue medical careers. Jordan Matthews will be our first recipient. Applause erupted. Jordan's mother started crying. Second, Thomas continued, the renewal and expansion of the downtown Detroit Community Clinic, where Jordan first learned his medical skills. The clinic will receive full funding and staffing support, ensuring other young people have the same opportunity to learn and serve. Aunt Marie gasped. Her small clinic, always struggling for resources, would now be able to help so many more people. Jordan, Thomas turned to him. Would you like to say a few words? Jordan approached the podium slowly. The lights felt hot, the cameras intimidating. But then he saw Maria smiling encouragingly, baby Jordan sleeping peacefully in her arms. 3 weeks ago, he began, his voice steady. I was just a kid trying to help my mom make rent. Now people keep calling me a hero. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But the real heroes are people like my Aunt Marie, who runs a clinic with almost no resources but never turns anyone away. My mom, who worked 2 jobs so I could keep studying. The people in our community who help each other even when they have nothing to give. His mother wiped tears from her eyes. What happened on that flight? Jordan continued. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about doing what needed to be done. And that's what I want to do with my life. Help people who need help. Fix what needs fixing. The baby started fussing. Without thinking, Jordan stepped away from the podium, medical training kicking in. She's probably hungry, he told Maria quietly. And it's been about 4 hours since her last feeding. Maria laughed. Still keeping track? Always. The press conference wrapped up. Hospital administrators distributed information about the new scholarship program. Community leaders discussed plans for the clinic expansion. Jordan slipped away from the crowd, finding a quiet corner with his mother. You okay, baby? She asked. Yeah. He watched the scene before him. Aunt Marie discussing clinic plans with Thomas Richardson. Maria showing off baby Jordan to admiring nurses, his former flight crew posing for pictures. Remember what you said that night? His mother asked. About staying home instead of taking that flight? Jordan nodded. Sometimes the best things happen when we're scared but do it anyway. A young girl approached them shyly, holding a newspaper with Jordan's story. Are you the doctor who saved the baby on the plane? She asked. Not a doctor yet, Jordan corrected. Just a student. But I want to be like you when I grow up. Jordan knelt down to her level. You want to be a doctor? She nodded eagerly. Then study hard. Help people when you can. And don't let anyone tell you what you can't do. The girl's mother appeared. Thank you, she said quietly. She's been talking about becoming a doctor ever since she saw your story. Jordan watched them walk away, something warm growing in his chest. Thomas Richardson approached with more papers. Ready to see your new study program? The hospital's top surgeons have agreed to mentor you. Can I start at the clinic first? Jordan asked. There's a lot of people there who still need help. Thomas smiled. Of course. That's exactly why we chose you for this program. The baby's cry cut through the crowd noise. Jordan turned automatically, medical training ever present. Just a diaper change, Maria called over laughing. Stand down, Dr. Matthews. His mother squeezed his shoulder. Speaking of which, we should head to the clinic. Aunt Marie's expecting a busy afternoon. You don't have to work today, Thomas reminded her. The hospital position doesn't start until Monday. My son's not the only one who helps people, Sarah Matthews replied proudly. They gathered their things. Jordan's medical books, his mother's new workplace ID, Aunt Marie's clinic keys. The press conference crowd dispersed, returning the airport to its normal rhythm. Jordan, Maria called as they headed out. Thank you. Again, he smiled, watching baby Jordan sleep peacefully in her arms, just doing what needed to be done. Outside, the Detroit summer sun beat down on the parking lot. Jordan could see his aunt's clinic from here. Its worn sign now, sporting a renovation coming soon banner. Ready? His mother asked. Jordan nodded, thinking about the scared 14-year-old who'd stood in this same spot 3 weeks ago, worried about leaving his mother alone. That boy was gone. In his place stood someone new. Someone who'd discovered his purpose 7 miles up in the sky. Someone who knew exactly what he was meant to do. Ready, he said, and together, they walked toward their new future, taking off in ways no airplane could match.